It started with a private warning delivered behind the heavy oak doors of Windsor Castle, a warning so sensitive that even senior courtiers were ordered to leave the room. But when Zara Tindall emerged hours later, visibly shaken and refusing to answer questions, palace insiders immediately sensed that something catastrophic had happened. What began as a quiet family dispute soon exploded into one of the most devastating inheritance battles tied to Prince Philip's personal legacy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, Zara Tindall had been viewed as one of the few members of the royal family who shared an unusually authentic bond with Prince Philip. Unlike the carefully managed relationships, often shaped by palace obligations, theirs reportedly carried something more personal, more grounded, and far removed from the endless calculations that dominate royal life behind closed doors. Palace insiders had long whispered that Philip admired Zara's resilience, her independence, and her refusal to weaponize her royal position for personal gain. She was seen as practical, loyal, and emotional, steady in ways that reminded many senior aides of Philip himself. That was why reports surrounding the confidential meeting at Windsor immediately triggered alarm across royal circles. According to multiple insiders, Zara had entered the gathering expecting final clarification regarding several sentimental heirlooms from Prince Philip's deeply private personal collection, items that had allegedly been discussed informally within the family for years. These were not merely expensive artifacts or decorative royal possessions. They reportedly included handwritten naval journals, private correspondence, ceremonial gifts collected during decades of foreign tours, and deeply personal keepsakes connected to Philip's life beyond the public institution of monarchy itself. But something changed inside that room. Almost immediately after the meeting began, staff members reportedly noticed an atmosphere unlike anything usually associated with routine estate discussions. Senior aides were dismissed early. Certain legal advisors remained behind while others were quietly instructed to wait outside. Palace administrative staff allegedly described the mood as icy and unusually tense, particularly given the emotional sensitivity surrounding Prince Philip's memory. What shocked observers most was the claim that Zara was informed portions of the collection had either been legally frozen, reassigned, or placed under restricted institutional control through trustee authority. Sources close to royal administrative circles suggest the explanation blindsided her completely. For years, whispers inside Windsor had implied that certain pieces from Philip's personal archive would eventually pass quietly into the hands of family members who shared genuine emotional ties to him. Yet, according to insiders familiar with the confrontation, Zara was suddenly told that those understandings carried no enforceable weight under the structures now governing the estate. The emotional impact reportedly became impossible to ignore. Witnesses claim Zara left the meeting visibly pale and deeply unsettled, avoiding eye contact with palace staff as she departed through a quieter Windsor exit normally reserved for private family movements. Shortly afterward, Mike Tindall was allegedly seen consoling her during the drive away from the estate, fueling even more speculation that the situation inside D escalated far beyond a standard inheritance discussion. What made the controversy even more explosive was the growing whisper that old family agreements had suddenly been overturned by figures operating deep inside the royal institution itself. Several royal commentators began quietly questioning whether Prince Philip's personal wishes had been buried beneath layers of legal bureaucracy designed to protect broader royal interests. Others wondered whether the decision reflected a much larger power struggle unfolding privately during King Charles III's ongoing health challenges. Reports suggest tensions over Philip's personal legacy had already been building for months, with disagreements emerging over who should control sensitive family possessions tied to the monarchy's inner history. As the silence from Buckingham Palace grew heavier, media insiders and royal correspondents began noticing another disturbing detail. King Charles himself remained unusually distant from the situation. No clarification came from the palace. No effort was made to publicly calm speculation. And within royal circles, silence often speaks louder than outrage. Some insiders now whisper that Charles may have approved the trustees' decision reluctantly, fearing larger institutional complications if private inheritance promises were allowed to override formal legal structures. Others claim he may have been pressured into avoiding direct involvement altogether, while senior palace operators handled the matter behind closed doors. Either way, the damage had already begun spreading through the family itself. Because for Zara, according to those close to her, this was never simply about money or ownership. It was about trust, about memory, about one final emotional connection to the grandfather who had quietly stood beside her through much of her life while the institution around them constantly shifted beneath their feet. And as royal insiders continued piecing together fragments of what happened inside Windsor that day, one terrifying possibility slowly emerged above all the others. But the real shock wasn't simply that Zara lost access to the collection it was discovering. Who inside the royal institution may have orchestrated the decision behind closed doors? For decades, Prince Philip's private collection was spoken about inside royal circles, almost like forbidden history, a deeply personal archive of naval artifacts, handwritten journals, ceremonial gifts, hunting rifles, watches, paintings, and intimate family treasures never meant for public display. And according to whispered palace traditions, Zara Tindall had long been considered one of the family members closest to inheriting part of that hidden world. The deeper royal insiders looked into the controversy surrounding Prince Philip's collection, the more emotionally charged the story became. Because this was never simply about expensive heirlooms hidden behind palace walls. What made the situation so explosive was the deeply personal meaning attached to the collection itself. Unlike the carefully catalogued crown assets controlled by the institution, these possessions reportedly reflected the private side of Prince Philip few outsiders ever truly understood. They carried fragments of his identity long before he became trapped inside the machinery of monarchy. Sources familiar with royal archival discussions claim many of the artifacts dated back decades before Charles became king, and before Buckingham Palace transformed Philip into one of the most disciplined royal figures of the modern era. There were reportedly naval keepsakes tied to his service years, journals connected to foreign tours, ceremonial gifts exchanged quietly between world leaders, and deeply sentimental items associated with private family milestones hidden far away from public attention. In many ways, the collection represented the last untouched version of Prince Philip himself. And according to multiple palace whispers, Zara Tindall occupied a uniquely emotional place within that story. Insiders have long claimed Philip saw something deeply familiar in his granddaughter. Unlike many members of the royal family shaped by titles, hierarchy, and endless institutional expectations, Zara built her reputation outside the palace bubble. She competed. She failed publicly. She rebuilt herself repeatedly without demanding royal protection. That independence reportedly earned Philip's admiration over many years. Royal commentators often describe their relationship as unusually natural, free from the stiffness that sometimes defines royal interactions behind closed doors. While other grandchildren carried the pressure of future constitutional roles, Zara represented something simpler and more personal to Philip, a reminder of authenticity in a family increasingly consumed by image management, succession anxieties, and institutional survival. Several insiders even whispered that Philip privately trusted Zara more than many senior royals, because she never appeared interested in exploiting family status for influence or power. That emotional connection is precisely why the trustees' decision triggered such devastation inside Windsor. According to reports emerging from royal administrative circles, family members had long operated under informal understandings regarding portions of Philip's personal archive. Nothing public. Nothing officially documented in the rigid language of royal bureaucracy. But enough private conversations allegedly existed for insiders to believe certain heirlooms would eventually pass quietly to Zara. Some even claim Prince Philip had personally referenced particular items during private family moments years earlier, reinforcing the expectation that she would become one of the guardians of his personal legacy. Yet once legal structures surrounding the collection came under trustee control, those understandings suddenly appeared to vanish beneath institutional procedure. Trustees reportedly insisted the arrangements had been misunderstood, a phrase that immediately sent shockwaves through royal circles because of what it implied. If decades of private family expectations could simply be erased through technical legal interpretation, then what other royal promises held any meaning at all? The controversy quickly reopened old wounds tied to inheritance tensions that had already surfaced after Queen Elizabeth II's passing. Royal commentators began drawing uncomfortable comparisons between this dispute and previous behind-the-scenes struggles over personal possessions, estates, and symbolic family artifacts quietly redistributed during periods of institutional transition. Some insiders now whisper that the monarchy's growing obsession with centralized control has begun colliding dangerously with private family loyalties. Others argue the palace fears emotional inheritance claims because they threaten the rigid systems designed to protect royal assets from future disputes. But beneath the legal language and carefully managed silence, a darker possibility slowly began taking shape. Because the more people examined the sudden reversal surrounding Prince Philip's collection, the more it appeared that powerful figures inside the institution may have decided sentiment, loyalty, and even family memory were secondary to protecting the monarchy's internal machinery at all costs. Yet behind the legal explanations and official silence, insiders say the dispute was becoming far more personal and far more ruthless than anyone outside the palace realized. The meeting itself reportedly lasted less than 40 minutes, but according to multiple palace whispers, those 40 minutes changed Zara Tindall's relationship with the institution forever. Because instead of receiving confirmation of her inheritance, she was allegedly handed a devastating explanation. The trustees had chosen to block access to critical parts of Prince Philip's personal collection indefinitely. By the time Zara entered the room, insiders claimed the outcome may already have been decided. What was presented publicly as a routine clarification over Prince Philip's personal estate allegedly unfolded more like a carefully managed institutional intervention, designed to shut down emotional claims before they could evolve into something far more dangerous for the monarchy itself. Sources very familiar with palace administrative procedures suggest trustees opened the meeting with language focused heavily on preservation concerns, legal boundaries, and long-term archival protection. But according to whispers now circulating across royal circles, those explanations immediately felt cold, calculated, and disturbingly detached from the emotional reality surrounding Prince Philip's legacy. Because for Zara, this was never about acquiring priceless possessions or strengthening personal wealth. The items at the center of the dispute reportedly carried memories attached to private conversations, family traditions, and moments shared quietly with the grandfather she admired throughout her life. Yet inside that room, insiders claim sentiment collided headfirst with the unforgiving machinery of royal bureaucracy. Several royal commentators have since described the meeting as one of the clearest examples of how the institution prioritizes control over emotion whenever family loyalty threatens to interfere with official structures. Reports suggest trustees informed Zara that certain heirlooms had already been moved into protected royal holding arrangements connected to long-term institutional preservation strategies. Some items, according to palace whispers, were allegedly transferred under archival supervision tied to broader royal collections, effectively placing them beyond the reach of private inheritance discussions altogether. That revelation reportedly stunned Zara. For years, insiders believed at least portions of Prince Philip's deeply personal archive would remain within the family members emotionally closest to him. But suddenly, those expectations appeared meaningless. Legal advisors allegedly insisted that private understandings carried no enforceable authority without formal documentation, a phrase that reportedly shifted the atmosphere inside the room almost instantly from painful to devastating. Sources close to royal staff claim Zara pushed back emotionally during portions of the discussion, questioning whether Prince Philip's personal wishes were being buried beneath technical legal interpretations designed to protect the institution rather than honor the man himself. Insiders whisper that tensions escalated sharply when references were made to verbal family agreements discussed over many years behind palace walls. But according to report, trustees remained unmoved. Their position allegedly centered on institutional continuity, arguing that sensitive royal possessions connected to historical figures required centralized oversight rather than informal distribution based on emotional expectations. To some observers, the explanation sounded procedural. To others, it sounded brutal, because buried beneath the legal terminology was a devastating message. Family memory no longer carried the weight it once did inside the modern monarchy. The emotional fallout reportedly intensified once Zara realized the reversal may not have emerged solely from the trustees themselves. Royal insiders now whisper that deeper palace factions could have influenced the decision long before the meeting ever took place. Some commentators believe senior institutional figures feared that allowing informal inheritance arrangements would create dangerous precedents during a period already marked by uncertainty surrounding King Charles III's health, royal succession anxieties, and growing internal tensions across the House of Windsor. Others suspect competing interests inside the palace sought tighter control over historically sensitive possession, tied to Prince Philip's legacy before future disputes could emerge. Whatever the truth may be, insiders claim Zara left the meeting feeling not simply disappointed, but profoundly betrayed by an institution she had spent her entire life protecting without complaint. As whispers surrounding the confrontation spread quietly through aristocratic and royal-adjacent circles, public sympathy began shifting rapidly toward Zara. Even commentators usually supportive of palace protocol reportedly described the trustees' handling of the situation as unusually icy and bureaucratic. Because while legal structures may explain ownership on paper, they cannot erase decades of family expectation, emotional attachment, and personal trust built quietly behind the scenes. And the more the palace refused to clarify what truly happened inside Windsor that day, the more speculation grew surrounding who may have benefited from shutting Zara out so decisively. But as outrage quietly spread through royal circles, attention suddenly shifted toward one explosive question no one inside Windsor wanted publicly asked. Almost immediately, whispers inside the palace turned toward King Charles III. Not because he publicly addressed the controversy, but because he didn't. And in royal life, silence can sometimes reveal far more than words ever could. As outrage surrounding Zara Tindall's blocked inheritance quietly spread through royal circles, attention began shifting away from the trustees themselves and toward the one figure many believed could have stopped the entire situation with a single private intervention: King Charles III. Yet according to palace insiders, no such intervention ever came. That absence quickly became the center of growing speculation inside Windsor because those familiar with royal family dynamics understood something deeply uncomfortable. Charles had always maintained a complicated position between institutional duty and personal loyalty. And now, for the first time since becoming king, many insiders feared those two forces had collided in ways that left him politically trapped and emotionally cornered. Reports suggest senior aides urged Charles to remain publicly distant from the controversy from the very beginning, warning that any direct involvement could risk reopening wider inheritance disputes connected to royal estates, private collections, and long-standing family arrangements that had remained quietly unresolved for years. The timing made the silence even more unsettling. Sources close to palace administrative circles claim the monarchy was already navigating extraordinary internal pressure linked to Charles's ongoing health concerns, succession anxieties, and the increasingly delicate balance between preserving tradition and preventing new fractures inside the royal family. According to several commentators, advisors feared that openly siding with Zara would send a dangerous message throughout aristocratic and royal networks that emotional expectations could override formal legal structures governing sensitive royal property. In other words, what looked on the surface like a family disagreement over heirlooms was allegedly viewed inside palace corridors as something far larger and potentially destabilizing. Some insiders now whisper that Charles understood exactly how painful the trustees' decision would be for Zara, but believed intervening personally could trigger future inheritance battles impossible for the monarchy to control once precedent had been established. Still, that explanation did little to calm the growing emotional tension surrounding the king's silence. Because according to several palace whispers, Zara had privately expected support from Charles based not on politics, but on family loyalty. Throughout much of her life, she had remained one of the least controversial members of the royal family. She rarely sought headlines, avoided public feuds, and maintained a reputation for discretion during periods when other royal relationships were collapsing under media pressure. Insiders claim she believed those years of quiet loyalty would matter when the institution faced a moment requiring compassion rather than calculation. But instead, according to commentators following the situation closely, she allegedly encountered the cold reality of modern monarchy. Personal bonds often disappear the moment institutional stability feels threatened. Royal historians quickly began drawing comparisons to earlier periods of tension surrounding royal estates and private possessions after the deaths of senior family figures. The monarchy, they argued, has always struggled with the blurred line between personal inheritance and institutional ownership. What belongs to the individual? What belongs to the crown? And who ultimately decides when emotion conflicts with protocol? Those questions reportedly haunted discussions unfolding privately behind palace walls as advisors attempted to contain growing frustration among members of the extended royal family. Courtiers allegedly worried that allowing sentimental inheritance claims to gain public sympathy could inspire future disputes involving paintings, correspondence, jewelry, private archives, and historically sensitive possessions scattered across generations of royal estates. To them, the issue was no longer simply about Zara Tindall. It had become about protecting the institution from emotional fragmentation during one of the most uncertain periods in recent royal history. But outside those carefully guarded palace calculations, public perception was beginning to shift rapidly. Media insiders noticed that Charles avoided appearing publicly alongside Zara for several days after the controversy intensified, a detail that only deepened speculation about tensions behind the scenes. Some interpreted the distance as strategic containment. Others saw it as evidence of personal discomfort, even regret. And with every unanswered question, whispers surrounding the king's role grew louder, because the more silent the palace became, the harder it became to ignore the painful possibility that Zara had not simply lost access to Prince Philip's personal collection. She may have lost faith in the institution itself. But while palace officials focused on containing the fallout, those closest to Zara say the emotional damage had already become impossible to hide. Those who know Zara Tindall best reportedly describe her not as furious but heartbroken. Because according to insiders familiar with the family dynamic, this battle was never truly about wealth, status, or priceless artifacts. It was about losing one final connection to the grandfather she adored. As the controversy surrounding Prince Philip's personal collection continued spreading through royal circles, those closest to Zara allegedly became increasingly disturbed by how deeply the situation affected her emotionally behind closed doors. Palace insiders claim the public narrative surrounding inheritance disputes completely misunderstood the real source of her pain. This was not a story driven by greed, ambition, or financial disappointment. According to friends familiar with Zara's relationship with Prince Philip, many of the heirlooms at the center of the conflict carried emotional weight impossible to measure through legal documents or trustee authority. They represented memories, shared moments, private encouragement during difficult years, quiet conversations far removed from cameras, royal expectations, and institutional pressure. And that emotional connection, insiders whisper, is what made the trustees' decision feel less like a legal ruling and more like the erasure of a deeply personal chapter of her life. For years, Prince Philip reportedly played a unique role in Zara's world, especially during periods when she struggled with public pressure, sporting setbacks, and the emotional demands that come with existing inside the orbit of the monarchy, while never fully belonging to its protected inner structure. Royal commentators have long described Philip as one of the few senior figures who genuinely respected Zara's independence. He admired resilience, discipline, emotional toughness, and according to whispers from those familiar with family dynamics, he often encouraged Zara to pursue her equestrian ambitions without becoming consumed by royal expectations or palace politics. Some insiders even claim Philip privately related to Zara more easily than many others in the family because she represented a version of royal life still connected to authenticity rather than institutional performance. That is why the collection mattered so profoundly to her. The items reportedly symbolized not privilege, but continuity. Proof that those deeply personal relationships still carried meaning within a monarchy increasingly dominated by procedure and control. As reports surrounding Zara's emotional reaction quietly emerged, public sympathy began shifting dramatically in her favor. Friends allegedly described her feeling cut off from part of her own family history, as though something sacred had been placed behind institutional barriers she could no longer cross. Royal insiders say the emotional devastation became particularly visible in private moments following the Windsor meeting, where Zara reportedly withdrew from several social appearances, while those closest to her attempted to shield her from growing media speculation. According to commentators following the fallout closely, Mike Tindall became fiercely protective during this period, frustrated by what some insiders described as the palace's inability to recognize the deeply human consequences of the trustees' decision. Sources whisper that he viewed the situation not as a constitutional issue, but as a profound emotional betrayal inflicted upon someone who had spent her entire life defending the family quietly and loyally without demanding anything in return. The deeper the controversy spread, the more royal historians and commentators began comparing the dispute to previous fractures within the monarchy tied to inheritance, legacy, and emotional exclusion. Again and again, the same pattern appeared to emerge. Legal authority overpowering private loyalty, institutional preservation crushing personal trust, and beneath it all, a growing fear that the modern monarchy had become increasingly disconnected from the emotional realities inside its own family structure. Several commentators argued the palace dramatically underestimated how strongly the public would react once the story shifted away from wealth and toward grief. Because once people began understanding that Zara's heartbreak centered on memory rather than money, the entire narrative changed. Evidently, this was no longer viewed as an aristocratic disagreement over expensive possessions. It became a story about loss, about loyalty, about what happens when family promises collide with institutional survival. Yet despite the growing emotional pressure surrounding the controversy, insiders claim quiet reconciliation efforts behind the scenes failed to repair the damage. Palace aides reportedly attempted to calm tensions privately, but according to whispers inside royal circles, trust had already been broken in ways far more difficult to restore than officials initially understood. The silence surrounding Prince Philip's true wishes only deepened the wounds further, leaving unresolved questions hanging heavily over everyone involved. And just when the palace believed the controversy might finally disappear from public view, a new revelation threatened to reopen the entire dispute all over again. Then came the whispers about documents, quiet references buried inside palace conversations, mentions of handwritten notes, alleged private understandings. And suddenly, insiders began questioning whether Prince Philip's true intentions had ever been fully revealed to the trustees at all. What began as scattered speculation quickly evolved into something far more dangerous for the palace to contain. According to whispers circulating through royal-adjacent circles, certain family members allegedly began referencing private correspondence connected to Prince Philip's final year's letters, annotations, and informal records that may have reflected personal wishes never formally incorporated into the legal structures governing his collection. No official confirmation emerged. No documents were publicly produced. Yet the rumors alone were enough to send shockwaves through an institution already struggling to suppress growing emotional fallout surrounding Zara Tindall's blocked inheritance. Because if even fragments of those claims prove true, the entire foundation supporting the trustees' decision could suddenly appear morally compromised, even if technically legal. And inside the monarchy, moral legitimacy often matters just as much as formal authority. Sources familiar with palace operations claim aides moved quickly behind the scenes once the whispers intensified. Discussions reportedly became more guarded. Administrative staff allegedly received renewed reminders regarding confidentiality surrounding royal archival materials. Some insiders even suggest efforts were made to quietly discourage further speculation before the controversy expanded beyond inheritance, tensions into broader questions about whether Prince Philip's personal wishes had been deliberately minimized in favor of institutional convenience. That possibility alone carried explosive implications. Because throughout his life, Philip reportedly maintained deep skepticism toward excessive bureaucracy, rigid court formalities, and what he privately viewed as the monarchy's tendency to bury emotional realities beneath procedural control. Royal commentators began revisiting stories from decades earlier describing Philip as fiercely independent, impatient with institutional interference, and determined to maintain personal authority over matters he considered private. Suddenly, those old character assessments felt newly relevant. As media fascination intensified, speculation surrounding hidden inventory records and archived correspondence began spreading rapidly. Some insiders whispered about handwritten annotations attached to older estate inventories. Others referenced informal family, wily discussions allegedly witnessed years earlier involving specific heirlooms tied to Zara. None of it could be independently confirmed. Yet the sheer persistence of the rumors created a dangerous atmosphere for palace officials attempting to contain the controversy. Because every unanswered question seemed to strengthen public suspicion that critical information remained hidden somewhere inside the royal system itself. Royal historians and commentators soon divided into competing camps. Some defended the trustees, arguing that institutions cannot operate based on private conversations or emotional assumptions lacking legal standing. Others warned the palace may have acted too aggressively, prioritizing institutional protection before fully understanding the emotional and symbolic consequences surrounding Prince Philip's legacy. Behind closed doors, insiders claimed the tension inside the family itself grew even worse once the rumors surfaced. What had previously been framed as an unfortunate but necessary legal decision allegedly began transforming into something much more personal and politically dangerous. Some family members reportedly questioned whether every relevant document connected to Philip's collection had truly been examined before the trustees finalized their ruling. Others feared reopening the issue entirely could unleash deeper divisions surrounding royal inheritance structures already strained by years of internal distrust, succession anxieties, and fragile personal relationships. According to palace whispers, even those who initially supported the trustees allegedly became nervous about the growing perception that the institution was hiding something emotionally significant from both Zara and the public. And still, Buckingham Palace refused to offer clarity. That silence became its own form of fuel. The less officials said, the more fascination surrounding the dispute intensified across media coverage, royal commentary, and public speculation. Because people were no longer simply debating ownership of personal belongings. They were questioning whether the monarchy itself had become so consumed by legal preservation and institutional caution that it could no longer recognize the emotional cost of denying a family member one final connection to someone she deeply loved. What made the situation even more haunting was the possibility that Prince Philip's true wishes may never be fully known at all, buried somewhere between informal conversations, unwritten understandings, and private words never intended for public scrutiny. But by this point, the inheritance battle had become something much larger than a disagreement over personal belongings. It had become a painful struggle over loyalty, memory, and royal identity itself. Behind palace walls, insiders say the atmosphere surrounding the royal family became colder almost overnight. Conversations reportedly turned cautious. Invitations became selective. And what once seemed like a private disagreement over Prince Philip's collection was now quietly reshaping relationships across the House of Windsor itself. As the controversy deepened, the emotional fracture surrounding Zara Tindall allegedly spread far beyond the original inheritance dispute itself. According to palace whispers, the situation created an atmosphere of discomfort so intense that even routine family interactions reportedly began changing behind closed doors. Royal aides allegedly noticed conversations becoming shorter, gatherings more controlled, and once relaxed family dynamics increasingly weighed down by spoken tension. What frightened many insiders most was not simply the disagreement itself, but how quickly it exposed divisions that may have already existed quietly beneath the surface for years. Because once questions emerged about Prince Philip's true wishes, loyalty inside the monarchy reportedly became far more complicated than palace officials expected. At the center of that emotional storm stood Princess Anne. Sources close to royal circles claim Anne was deeply shaken by the emotional fallout surrounding her daughter, particularly because of her own lifelong devotion to duty, restraint, and institutional loyalty. For decades, Anne had reportedly accepted the harsh realities of royal life without public complaint. She defended the institution relentlessly, carried out endless responsibilities without drama, and remained one of the monarchy's most disciplined figures during periods when other relationships fractured under pressure. But according to insiders familiar with the family dynamic, watching Zara feel emotionally cut off from Prince Philip's personal legacy struck something deeply personal inside Anne herself. Some whispers even suggest she privately viewed the handling of the dispute as unnecessarily cold, especially given Zara's close relationship with Philip throughout his life. Yet, like so many conflicts inside the royal system, the emotional truth reportedly remained buried beneath silence, protocol, and carefully controlled appearances. Family gatherings allegedly became especially tense in the weeks that followed. Sources claim invitations were managed more cautiously, conversations around inheritance and family history quietly avoided, and certain palace advisors increasingly nervous about the possibility of emotional confrontations spilling beyond private settings. Courtiers reportedly feared that any public leak revealing internal divisions could severely damage the monarchy's already fragile public image during a period dominated by health concerns surrounding King Charles III and growing scrutiny over the institution's internal culture. The palace, according to commentators, appeared desperate to prevent the dispute from evolving into a larger public symbol of emotional dysfunction within the House of Windsor itself. But despite those efforts, whispers continued spreading through aristocratic circles, royal commentators, and media. Insiders who sensed the emotional damage inside the family had become impossible to fully contain. What made the situation even more politically dangerous was the growing suggestion that younger royals privately questioned how the trustees handled the controversy. According to several media insiders, some members of the extended family allegedly struggled to understand why emotional sensitivity appeared almost entirely absent from decisions tied to someone as personally significant as Prince Philip. Those frustrations reportedly reignited older resentments already simmering quietly beneath the institution for years, resentments tied to hierarchy, favoritism, succession pressure, and the constant tension between public duty and private humanity. Royal historians soon began comparing the atmosphere surrounding Zara's inheritance dispute to earlier moments in royal history, where questions over personal property and family legacy exposed deeper institutional fractures, hidden behind carefully managed public unity. Again and again, the same haunting pattern appeared to emerge. The monarchy's instinct to protect itself often came at the emotional expense of the very people expected to defend it. Meanwhile, public fascination surrounding the controversy only intensified as Buckingham Palace continued refusing direct comment. That silence created a vacuum filled by speculation, sympathy, and growing distrust about what may truly have happened behind closed doors. Every unanswered question strengthened the sense that this was no longer merely a disagreement over heirlooms, documents, or legal authority. It had become a deeply emotional reckoning over how much humanity still exists inside an institution built on control, preservation, and survival. And as the silence inside Windsor grew heavier, one final realization began settling over everyone involved. In the end, the cruelest part of the controversy may not be the blocked inheritance itself, but what it revealed about the fragile balance between family, legacy, and the unforgiving machinery of monarchy. Because while institutions protect rules, families survive on trust. And according to royal insiders, that trust may now be permanently fractured. As the storm surrounding Zara Tindall and Prince Philip's personal collection slowly settled into uneasy silence, one truth reportedly became impossible for many inside royal circles to ignore. The dispute had exposed something far deeper than an argument over heirlooms or legal authority. It revealed how vulnerable even the closest family bonds can become once they collide with the rigid systems designed to preserve the monarchy at all costs. And for many observers, that realization carried a sadness far greater than the inheritance battle itself, because at the center of the controversy stood a relationship that had long been viewed as one of the most sincere and emotionally grounded connections within the entire royal family. For years, Zara and Prince Philip were often described by insiders as sharing an understanding built not on status or constitutional obligation, but on mutual respect, resilience, and emotional honesty. He reportedly admired her independence. She admired his strength, discipline, and refusal to bend under pressure. In a family shaped by duty and restraint, their bond felt unusually real. That is why the emotional fallout surrounding the trustees' decision resonated so deeply with the public once the full weight of the story began emerging. The more people heard about Zara's reaction, the more sympathy shifted toward her side of the controversy. Royal commentators increasingly argued that the institution may have fundamentally misjudged how powerfully people would respond to a story centered not on privilege, but on grief. Because to many observers, Zara no longer appeared as a royal fighting for possessions. She appeared as a granddaughter mourning the loss of one final emotional connection to someone she deeply loved. And as those emotions spread beyond palace walls, uncomfortable questions surrounding the monarchy itself became harder to suppress. Why had compassion seemed secondary to procedure? Why did institutional preservation appear to outweigh personal memory? And perhaps most haunting of all, were Prince Philip's true wishes ever fully honored at all? Those questions remain unanswered. Despite months of speculation, whispers surrounding possible letters, private conversations, and informal promises continue lingering in the background without resolution. The palace has maintained its silence. Trustees have reportedly remained firm in their position. Yet, according to insiders, the absence of clarity has only deepened public mistrust surrounding the controversy. Because silence inside the monarch, very high, rarely ends speculation. It strengthens it. And in this case, every unanswered question seemed to reinforce a growing perception that something emotionally significant had been lost beneath layers of legal caution and institutional control. Some royal historians even believe the dispute exposed deeper anxieties quietly haunting the modern monarchy itself, fears surrounding succession, legacy management, and the struggle to maintain unity while balancing personal loyalty against constitutional responsibility. Behind all the commentary, however, remains a far more human reality. Families survive through memory, through trust, through the quiet belief that emotional bonds still matter when difficult moments arrive. And according to those closest to the situation, that belief may have been permanently shaken for Zara Tindall during those devastating weeks inside Windsor. The collection may remain protected behind palace systems and legal structures, but the emotional damage reportedly left behind cannot be archived, controlled, or quietly stored away. Because what made Prince Philip's legacy powerful was never the financial value of the items connected to him. It was the meaning the attached to them, the memories, the encouragement, the private moments no institution can fully preserve once trust begins to disappear, and perhaps that is the real tragedy hidden beneath this entire controversy. Not simply the question of who inherited what, but the painful realization that even inside one of the most famous families in the world, love, loyalty, and memory can still become casualties of power, silence, and survival. Because long after the headlines disappear and the palace doors close once again, the unanswered question will remain the same. Was Zara Tindall denied an inheritance, or denied one final piece of the grandfather she never stopped protecting? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.